Hello and welcome to another episode of The Soul of Business with Blaine Bartlett. I am your host, Blaine Bartlett. This show, The Soul of Business, I started this show mostly because I was interested in changing the way that a lot of people think about the impact of business or the potential for impact that business can have. Impact is obviously what business has anyway. But yeah, an unexamined life, as Socrates said, isn't worth living. I think an unexamined business is not worth running. And what I mean by that very specifically is businesses have impact. And if we're not being mindful and really intentional about the impact, the downstream impact of our businesses, we run the risk of having, in fact, some of the stuff that we are encountering today. Um, the environmental degradation, wealth inequality, you just kind of name it. We've got microplastics in the bottom of the Mariana Trench and snowflakes in the Himalayas. So there's a lot that can be done with business in particular to mitigate the downside impact and uplift the potential for good that business can actually produce. And that little soliloquy, if you will, sets us up for me introducing our guest today. Melanie Velde is a researcher initially, but I'm going to move quickly away from the title of researcher. She is the founder of a company called Big Tree Global, and a lot of her work is organized around this notion of impact. And she has a fascinating book out that we'll be discussing, discussing, Lead Like a Genius. And she's literally talking about lead like a genius. And in the book, she's outlining, how to outgrow the competition and transform our world through the activity of business. And business leaders will be very well served to pick up a copy of this book. It is a phenomenal read, number one, but the research that goes into it is just stellar. Which belies actually her background as a researcher. So she's brought brought her full game to the process. So, Melanie, welcome to the show. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you, Blaine. Thank you for having me and for the lovely introduction too.
Well, absolutely my pleasure. I have been looking forward to this conversation for some time. I'm going to just start by something that we have in common that we actually haven't spent a lot of time discussing, and it is some of the work that you did in Kibera, the
Oh
slum
yeah.
area in Kenya. I spent a lot of time in Africa, specifically in Kenya, and I've visited, been in, and actually have done some work in that area. It's the largest slum area, I think, outside of Soweto in South Africa, but it's the largest slum area in the world. What compelled you, number one, to go there? And number two, what was the nature of the work that you were doing there? And then I want to leverage that into a kind of a deeper conversation in another area, if we could.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, so I originally started out in business. I have a kind of engineering background and loved business, but I from kind of early childhood always really felt really struck by poverty. I just have always felt and still do that it's something that's intensely sad, and it's not necessary. And so I've always wanted to kind of find a way at the time away from business, thinking that's where the solution was. And now having kind of come full circle, realizing how much business can actually impact also on poverty. And that the solution lies there. But eventually I was really searching, what can I do with a business background that makes a difference? And so eventually, I ended up running programs and also an impact business in the Kibera slum. Like you say, it's second biggest slum in the world, home to over 1 million people who on average don't get beyond 30 years old. So it's very much a city of young children, young people, children, and a lot of people without parents, obviously. So we tried different ways to help people. We supported children, through some of the programs with local schools, with school uniforms, with school fees, with food programs to keep them from having to move to orphanages, but kind of then remain with families in the slum, which is really their community. But we also had an impact business. So for young women who'd had no education and pretty bleak prospects usually, and they'd often end up in prostitution or being married away quite young. And so we created a fashion business, a jewelry business, to provide training and employment opportunities. And that was for me the kind of big eye opener in terms of, yeah, wow, business can actually make such a structural difference compared to the more traditional charitable approach, but
Yeah.
also how challenging that is. And that was really what sparked me then wanting to do my research and learn more.
And, I mean, and you continue to work with young kids. I know a lot of your work is with MBA students, and you are an award-winning researcher here. And it's not just academia. I mean, you came out of a multi-billion-dollar tech company, and you've worked with IT startups. The idea of business having impact in this way. I'm struck by something you just said. Poverty is not necessary. I mean, I've never heard anybody say that, and I know a lot of people that work in this field of philanthropic impact, that sort of thing, with the intent of minimizing poverty around the world. Poverty is not necessary. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Because I want to, and I am going to lead this back into a conversation around the soul of business, I promise. But yeah, the idea that poverty is not necessary. Elucidate on that just a little bit, if you would, please.
Yeah, okay. I think actually not just poverty, but most of our global issues are not necessary. And I think for a large part actually stem from how we do business and how we trade with each other. And yeah, I mean, just as a simple example to me is, if we think about it, right, okay, let's assume we can fix poverty and we want to do something from a business perspective. And so we're always so drawn to dealing with the symptoms. It's the same for us. Like we started programs to, make donations and support children going to school, all very, very good. And definitely alleviating symptoms can be very important, but often it doesn't really fix the issue.
Right.
It's a bit like mopping up, the floor when a bath is overflowing, as opposed to closing the tap. And the thing that I've really kind of come to, like with my research also, and yeah, I think that makes so much sense, is that if we actually create more opportunities for everyone, which we can, and we also pay people fairly, like based on kind of justice principles. Nelson Mandela already said that, like poverty is man-made. It's about trade justice. So if maybe later when you talk about business with soul, I think that's quite a crucial element. It's justice is rendering people their dues, essentially, is the definition. And if we did that, so not to say that, everything should be equal. People who, put more effort in, put more talent in, put more time in, have more education, they can be rewarded more. But essentially, it should be based on what they're due and not based on maybe a position of power in the supply chain. And if we did that, we would solve much of the poverty in the world. Yeah.
Now, that sounds very altruistic in one sense.
Yeah, and I don't think it is. I don't think it is. I don't think it is altruistic. I think we it's an interesting one. I saw your TED talk and you also mentioned Milton Friedman, and I think it's interesting. I mean, I think a lot of people now have moved away, right, from the things that he wrote, but you could go along with saying charity is desirable, and maybe it's not a core must for a business to be philanthropic, to be altruistic. It's desirable, and we can encourage it and admire it. But if a business is struggling, you could almost go along with his statement of, is it actually justifiable then to donate some of the money of the business into donating to charity, right? You could kind of go along with that. But justice is not desirable. It's enforceable. And I believe that that is the part that's been missing. And you talk about Adam Smith, and he said it. He said free markets can only function with strong principles of justice. Otherwise,
Yes.
society will crumble into atoms. And I think once you really start looking at it, it's hard to disagree. I can't imagine anyone would disagree once you really see it. Yeah.
Thank you for that. Thank you. Because I'm completely in your camp on this. Completely in your camp. I was reading an article today about the difficulties that Boeing is having right now. We've got doors falling off of airplanes. We've got just all kinds of things. And I mean, they're very isolated events and whatnot. But the article was actually addressing where did the malaise begin to creep in terms of how Boeing was conducting its business. And it began, as far as the author of this article was talking, when the McDonnell Douglas acquisition, when Boeing was acquired McDonnell Douglas. They also brought over a fellow by the name of Stonecipher, who was on the board, and he was an acolyte of Jack Welch. And the whole focus of those two gentlemen in particular, in that camp of business leaders, was that profit and shareholder value was the only thing that we need to be paying attention to as a business. Everything else takes the hindermost. Don't worry about quality. Don't worry. I mean, profit is what we're after. And the consequence of that has resulted in a very interesting impact over about a 30-year time frame here of an incredibly valuable company really having some very interesting difficulties of their own making.
Yeah.
And when we're looking at justice, when we're looking at what some might deem altruistic values, taking care of a greater, stewarding a greater whole. This is where my thinking around the soul of business actually begins to come into play, because in my estimation, Boeing lost its connection to the soul that made it what it was, and the soul has nothing to do with profit. The soul has to do with being a force of good. The soul has to do with creation, not aggregation, and there's a big difference in that. In your work, and I want to talk about this, because and I love this from the promotional piece that I got from your promotional or your publicity firm here. Geniuses like Mozart, Einstein, Picasso, Van Gogh, and Da Vinci share one common trait that sets them apart from their peers, and it's not their talent or a high IQ. What if you could use this secret to outgrow your competitors and increase your productivity and brand value, and create a 200 to 400% higher impact return, and genuinely transform our world for the better? So this is the kind of the core of your book, Lead Like a Genius. What's if it's not intelligence, IQ intelligence, what sets these geniuses apart? That's where I'd like to go. And we're going to take a real quick break here. And when we come back from the break, that's where I want us to jump, if we could.
Okay.
The nature of life is evidenced in nature. Nature grows, and all of nature honors the desire to be more, to have more, and to do more. Life thrives when it's allowed to grow. And ideally, thriving is what we also, all of us, want to be able to do. Unfortunately, at some stage in life, most people find themselves settling into what I can only call a rut. And a rut is nothing more than a coffin with the ends kicked out. You want to quickly get out of any rut that you find yourself in. When you stop growing, that's when the coffin starts to appear. The simple truth is this, and this is true for everything in nature. You're going to die. I'm going to die. Every one of us dies. So the question we need to come to grips with is not, are we going to die? The question nature asks us to answer is, are we truly living? That's what motivation is about. It's the desire to move. It's the desire to grow and to excel. Have I lived? How have I lived? I'd love for you to take advantage of my Leadership Mindset Masterclass. It's all about providing you with the tools to ensure thriving for yourself and for those around you. Register today to receive the free introduction video and find out more about this acclaimed program. You'll also receive a copy of my international #1 bestseller, Compassionate Capitalism, A Journey to the Soul of Business. I'm Blaine Bartlett, and I look forward to helping you thrive. Folks, welcome back. Before we took the break, I had kind of set Melanie up for a deeper dive into her book, Lead Like a Genius. And, I mentioned all of these geniuses. What sets them apart? And you've actually been able to, I think, codify a way to approach leading a business that produces a significantly different outcome through the impact that's generated. The floor is yours, madam.
Thank you. Yeah. Yeah. So I guess the question that really kind of was the driving force throughout my research, throughout developing my tools and then writing the book was really, after my experience in Kenya, really looking at best practices from around the world. Why is it that there's few companies that do tackle our global issues, whether it's climate change, plastics crisis, you mentioned, pollution, poverty, rising inequality, with much better results, and better results in terms of impact success rates. So if you talk about companies that are really good at social inclusion, more from an empowerment perspective, why do some have a 300 to 400% better success rate compared to the vast majority? And at the same time, what I found was that actually the ones that have better impact on our global issues also do better as a business. So it's interesting you're pointing out the Boeing example. What I found was that actually the companies that do this really well, that integrate the impact really well with their commercial model, they actually, if you look at it longer term, talk about shareholder value, they actually have better shareholder value. Okay. Yeah. Than their competitors. Yeah, so it's really interesting, and I really wanted to understand why. And if you really drill down to it, it's the same factor that geniuses like Einstein, Picasso, Mozart have in common. So Albert Rothenberg at Harvard, he wanted to find out back in 1979 what they had in common. So if it's not their IQ, it's not their talent, what is it? Why is it that they were exceptional in terms of what they achieved compared to many of their peers that were also very talented or had a very high IQ? And what he found was, it's that ancient yin and yang. It's the pursuit of the unity of opposites. And why that's so exceptional, it's because our human brain struggles with opposites. When we are confronted with opposites, we want to focus on one or the other. And for me, profits and purpose, or profits and maybe soul, I guess similarly, it's profits and impact on the world. It's often perceived as two opposites. And we see a business that should be profit driven and impact on the world, sustainability is a kind of secondary thing and often a separate thing. And vice versa. Like when you see an impact business, you often see that there is a real lack on the kind of commercial drive and some of the, what I call the really good profit drivers that are really virtuous. And so that's what I found, was that actually the ones with the best outcomes, both in terms of impact as well as business outcomes, commercial outcomes, they do both very well. They pursue the unity of the drive towards profit with a strong purpose and making a difference. Yeah.
That, folks, if you're listening, and you are listening, if you actually hear my voice right now, I want you to pay attention to that. Yeah, the ability to hold two opposing viewpoints is, in one sense, the definition of genius. To legitimately hold two oppositional points of view at the same time and consider both of them to be valid. So this notion of the unity of opposites, how how do I actually actualize this? Now, you've got something called the impact wheel,
Hmm.
that you talk about in your book.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's one thing to imagine holding these things in my mind,
Hmm. Yeah.
but behaviorally, how do I actually translate that into actions that produce
Yeah.
a generative,
Yeah.
impactful good?
Yeah. Yeah. No, good question. Because I was actually out for a run last week, and I thought you can't ask people the impossible. If our brains aren't wired to see both, we're always going to struggle to do that. But for me, that is the underlying core of it. But in the book, indeed, I've tried to make it, and it took me actually a few years after my research to make it really practical and simple. And it was interesting. My partner's mother was here over the weekend, and she's been reading the book, which is lovely because she has a business background, but she's never really been confronted with sustainability. She's late 80s, and she actually said, Mel, I get it. I get the book. It's so simple. And for me, she said, I don't mean to offend you, but it's so simple. And I'm like, and for me, it was actually a compliment because,
Yeah.
it can be very simple. And so the impact wheel it's the book talks about the examples, why they are exceptional with their outcomes. And it kind of divides it up into 4 parts. So really, where as a business, if you look at the United Nations SDGs, and often it can be overwhelming. When I work with business leaders, they say, oh, there's the 17 goals and all the sub goals, and I get lost.
Yeah.
And it's, I think, because they're split up, you are kind of drawn into symptoms often. And
Hmm.
like if you look at the second UN SDG dealing with hunger, it makes sense like Preds to donate leftover food to the homeless, right? But if you really look at it, it's actually 4 parts where companies can really integrate practices, initiatives where they tackle the root cause of the issue. So if you look at if you compare the Preds example with a restaurant in London called Brigade, who are an amazing restaurant. It's like a restaurant you want to go to, and most people that go don't know what an amazing impact they have, but they work with people who have been homeless or who are at risk of homelessness. And it's not what you often see, like a kind of social enterprise that doesn't do brilliant food, but it's first and foremost a great restaurant, and they train people up. They support them through this program, but they think about their profit at the same time, their commercial logic. So they don't take anyone in, but really they're very selective, like any other business would, with people with potential to become an excellent chef. The
Hmm.
training is excellent standards. The food, the service, the ambiance is excellent. And so people who come through that program, they end up with jobs such as in the Savoy Hotel. So it's really high end, and they have a success rate of over 80%, whereas most of these types
Really?
of initiatives, they're really proud of like a 20 to 30% success rate. So it's a great example of really integrating impact as part of the business, but not forgetting, that focus on what I call the good profit driver. So having a good service, good
Yeah.
quality is still very important. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so the book in the impact wheel talks about those 4 ways of really most businesses are able to take initiatives on that become a part of their business. Yeah.
I love that, and I love how you've simplified it, and into your, default mother-in-law, and
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
uh, her point about it's so simple. Yeah, I think it was
Yeah.
Carl Jung that said something about, yeah, if you can't make something simple, you haven't really understood it.
Hmm.
And based on her comment about the book, it sounds as if you really understand this issue. I'm struck by here that, and I'm just kind of synthesizing, some of the things that we've talked about here. That everything that we're encountering, yeah, is man-made. I mean, for ill or for, yeah, good. Yeah, it's man-made. Poverty is man-made. Social injustice is man-made. It's all man-made. And as
Yeah.
a consequence of being man-made, it says that the way that we conduct our business practices can actually mitigate
Yes.
a lot
Yes.
of what we're working with here. And
Yeah.
you're making it simple. The idea of the unity of opposites. I just get chills thinking about that one. That, I mean, truly, that is such an elegant way of positioning a problem statement and a solution statement in one bite-sized little meme. because you got both
Oh,
ends of it here.
okay,
Uh,
thank you. Yeah, that's a
yeah,
lovely way of saying it. Yeah.
yeah. Where
Yeah.
can people get the book? The book just came out in January of this year, January 2024. So it's a brand new book. I'm assuming it's available in all of the regular places. Yeah.
Yes, it is. And so Amazon obviously is hard to avoid.
Yeah, hard
And
to
then
avoid.
it's also available on lulu.com,
Okay.
an American company, and they are a B Corp. So it's the more sustainable option. It's slightly less convenient, I guess you don't have the checkout maybe set up as easily as on Amazon, but that's the most sustainable place to get the book, or via our website, bigtreeglobal.net.
BigTreeGlobal.net. We'll put that in the show notes, definitely.
Thank you.
Before we go, Mel, could you, just real briefly capture what Big Tree Global, what's your mission, what you're up to, with the organization? Because I want people to hear this from you. This is good stuff,
Oh,
folks.
thanks. Thanks. Yeah. So I would say just after all the years learning all this stuff myself, I've started working with companies, business leaders who are, feeling a need to make more of a difference, but
Mm-hmm.
are wanting to learn more. So I provide training courses, workshops, coaching mostly, to really kind of look at what are the best practices in the world in each of the kind of four areas, so the kind of main areas of the SDGs. And how do you integrate that, effectively? So if essentially, I guess the question is, if you have a limited amount of money or time or effort to invest, how can you make that go the furthest in terms of impact on the key issues that we face as humanity? But also in a way that, and I think that's also fair, that it becomes a competitive advantage. Yeah.
Perfect. Melanie van der Veld, hartelijk bedankt. It's
Oh,
been
alsjeblieft. Graag gedaan.
it has been a distinct pleasure having you on. I love this conversation. We've got a couple of other shows that we do, and I think it would be well worth my time at least, but definitely I think also yours, to get you some greater exposure on some of these other shows as well. So if
Great.
you're open to it, I'll let you know how to go about availing yourself of that. And we'll
Super.
just kind
Yeah,
of take
absolutely.
it from there. And
Love
I'd
to.
love to have you back on this show at some point. Yeah, after the book has kind of gotten its footing, and we can talk about just kind of what you're noticing.
Ah, super. Yeah, I would love to. Thanks. Yeah,
Okay,
great. Yeah.
wonderful. Folks, you've been listening to The Soul of Business. Melanie van der Veld, the founder of Big Tree Global. You can find out more at bigtreeglobal.net. And as always, as I sign off here, nature is my guru in so many ways. And one of the things that I've learned from nature is that there's nothing in nature that serves as a center of accumulation. So my admonition to you is go out and be a center of distribution in your life, and you will find it works a whole lot better. And until the next episode, have a great rest of your day, week, or month. Okay, I'll talk to you next time. Take care. Bye.